This is a special presentation from Council Rock Primary School.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. I want to make sure we give some time, particularly for kindergarten parents before everybody else is in, and just share with you a few of the thoughts that are out there. We'll go through the vast majority of this once we have everybody on at closer to 6 o'clock, but do, again, want to give particular time to kindergarten parents. You know, there's a few different questions on here about the planning for fall of 21, around reopening, around Wednesdays. I'd like to get into that in further detail at 6 with the whole group so that, I don't keep kind of hammering on the point or repeating myself. But I will say, generally speaking, that we don't see an opportunity anytime soon for people to come back for more instruction, more days of the week. We would like nothing more, by the way, but I don't see an opportunity for us to do that, given the need for social distancing and our limitations relative to space and people. And the plan for next year will depend on what the public health guidance is at that point. I would expect that once more people are vaccinated and, once there's essentially some kind of herd immunity achieved, that they would be looking at distancing differently and allow more people to be in those spaces, probably with masks. But I don't know any of that for sure. I can't speak to that from a public health perspective, but expecting that kids would return next year, although we'll plan for multiple different ways to deliver instruction, we would hope that things would be different. And again, I'll repeat this in more detail at 6 o'clock when everybody's on, but the Wednesdays right now are likely to remain the same, although we'll monitor that. Some districts have made changes, usually as a result of them not feeling great about what they're doing on Wednesdays. And I'm not telling you that, we've perfected that, but I can tell you that the day is, in our mind, more valuable than an asynchronous day. And if you think about just a simple cost-benefit thought, if you were to change Wednesdays right now to in-person, it would really only achieve, because of the every other week, at most probably 10 additional school days. I haven't counted them, but about 20 weeks left in the year, 10 additional school days between now and the end of the year in person, as you'd go back and forth. It would then also result in 10 additional asynchronous days. So given the fact that you'd have that as a result, we feel that sticking with essentially 20 remote days is likely a better answer than that split. And that's, at this point, the instructional decision we've made, although we'll continue to monitor that along the way also and consider those options. But right now, that's where we are in terms of reopening. Again, would like nothing more, particularly at the kindergarten level, where many of you have not set foot in the building, if not all of you, and your kids are spending very little time in the building. We're really sensitive to that fact. If there was an opportunity to do more, we would. One of the issues this hinges on for us is staff being vaccinated and a lack of access to that at this point, a struggle to get everybody vaccinated quickly. And so you'll hear media reports about reopening and how everybody should be reopened, and you'll hear about how the CDC, head of the CDC recently said that staff being vaccinated should not be an obstacle. And I want to make sure I'm clear that the context they're talking about is a little bit different. One, when they talk about reopening, we are reopened. They're talking about districts that have not set foot in school for even a hybrid model. And because of that conversation, they're saying that you shouldn't need to be vaccinated before a hybrid model like ours. And that's true, because we have not had people vaccinated all year. But in terms of bringing twice as many people into the building and the obstacles that would present and the safety issues that would present, we believe that is not a possibility until we have people vaccinated in terms of the adults that we have a responsibility to as well from a health safety perspective. So that's where we're at right now in terms of reopening anytime soon. We'll monitor that. We are advocating on a weekly, if not daily basis with elected officials, public health officials, anybody who will listen. I get the criticism about, if you can start high-risk sports, how come you can't have more kids in a classroom? I asked the exact same question. And there are reasons why they allowed for those sports to start. Again, those were decisions made outside of our purview, but they weren't made in the same context of thinking about having more kids in the classroom. And we have concerns about performing arts not being addressed too, which we're expressing those on a regular basis also. So with that, there are some other comments about prioritizing K through 5 learners when it's time to go. Also people have mentioned that to us along the way, and we understand that piece. I will tell you that junior seniors in high school would say you should prioritize junior seniors. because they're at the end of their academic career. I think there's all different opinions on this, but I do understand there are childcare issues involved in this conversation, foundational formation issues involved in this conversation. We would review all of that along the way. And I addressed the issues regarding Wednesdays and being in school more, etc. So what questions can we answer specific for kindergarten parents before we welcome everybody into this conversation? I would encourage you, if you want to unmute yourself, if there's anything specific that we can address, that would be great. Or if you want to put it into the chat, Mrs. Jeffries is monitoring that and she'll articulate those questions as well. Anybody like to start by unmuting themselves? If you have a particular question we can answer. And by the way, I didn't start. I should have started at the beginning saying I'm Kevin McGowan. I'm the superintendent. For those of you who I haven't met, I am not only anxious to have your kids in the building full time, but to meet all of you as well, and joined tonight by Mr. Tappan, the principal of Council Rock, Mrs. Jeffries, assistant principal, along with a host of board members and other administrators from the district here to answer your questions as well. Anybody that wants to unmute? There is a kindergarten parent who is also a board member, one unique cross-section, Sue Gasparino. Good to see you, Sue.
Dr. McGowan, there's a question in the chat just wanting a little bit more clarity on why space is an issue, particularly at kindergarten, given that enrollment was 196 kindergartners. This year there's 79 students, and just how that works out with space and people.
Yeah, that's a good question. So essentially we measured every classroom for how many kids we could have in the classroom at any one time. Remember, you're talking about split between half days. So those sections split between 2 half days. And then right now, the number of kids who can be in the space at once and maintain 6 feet of social distancing at all times. And there's the other spaces to consider as well, which would be the special area spaces, the cafeteria, and then movement in the hallway. So we simply determined that the number of kids we could have in the room was an issue. And then it's the number of kids when you start to spread people further out and how you can supervise them, and having enough space to be able to do that and enough people to be able to monitor that as well.
I can also speak just a little bit to the fact that we redeployed our resources based on who we had. So before we had enrollment projections, we had 5 kindergarten teachers. We redeployed to first grade to be able to even out those remote sections and hybrid sections to make sure that those didn't get too high. So we currently only have 4 kindergarten teachers, 2 hybrid and 2 remote. So that's a little bit more beyond the space. It's also the people. So,
right. So instead of having, so we still have normal size sections, although split into 2. They're smaller, but they're not as small as it would appear from that enrollment number, and had to take teachers. I'm really glad you pointed that out, Mr. Tappan. Had to take teachers that would have been on that grade level and move them to other grade levels to accommodate a remote program simultaneous with an in-person hybrid program. Great point. Other questions we can answer, either again from the chat or anybody who'd like to unmute and get at a kindergarten specific issue or anything related to Council Rock or the district?
I'll say something if it's okay. Sort of with my parent hat on, a lot of the other parents I've spoken with just regarding the Zoom on Wednesdays, that's come up a lot, specifically for kindergartners. Even the basic skill of muting and unmuting, and that has been difficult for some of our kindergartners. And so I just, and I have a 4th grader and a 6th grader, and their Wednesdays are on point because they are, they have those skills. Some of our kindergartners don't have those computer skills yet. So the 30 minutes of Zoom time that they're getting, it can be very frustrating for them. There's tears if the teacher doesn't see them on the square and they don't get called on, and so, I've heard a lot of frustration. I didn't know if any of the parents on here want to talk specifically about, the Zoom Wednesday, just to give people a space, because that's why you're hosting this special kindergarten section, so we can talk about it. So I don't know how the other kindergarten parents feel, but this is a safe place to talk about it, I think.
Absolutely.
So
Please do.
I guess I'll speak up. I think I would definitely echo that on the Wednesdays. I think I have a second grader and a kindergartner, and our Wednesdays are just a mess. It just feels like that trade-off between being in person when the kindergartners have such little time in the building. To me, I would absolutely take those 10 days of in-person plus 10 days of asynchronous over 20 Zoom sessions, because as Sue just pointed out, I mean, I don't know if you've ever hopped on a kindergarten Zoom call, but they're pretty hilarious. But there's just, the teachers are trying so hard. And I guess I should have started with, everyone is everything. I just think sometimes I feel a little bit frustrated when I read district-wide emails that it seems like these decisions are maybe made for holistically, this is best for the district. But I mean, I'm wondering, have you gotten feedback from the kindergarten teachers about what would their preference be, having the kids in the room another 10 days versus having the Zoom calls? And just how those decisions are made, if they are kind of thought about at the building level or if they're just made at the district level?
Great questions, Erin, and I'm sorry that that's not been ideal. It definitely is not the same experience for a 12th grader versus a kindergartner, and I understand that. I was an elementary teacher before and a primary principal, and have an understanding of that, although I can't say I've spent time on the kindergarten Zoom, so I will admit that. But in terms of how our decisions are made, we're a pretty decentralized system. In other words, I spend a lot of time with Mr. Tappan and Mrs. Jeffries. We all do as central office administrators. They're definitely not made without that input and without that conversation, without that discussion. We do a lot of discussing with our teaching staff and gathering feedback from them and having a good understanding of where they're at. So they're not made from a distance without that kind of conversation. We haven't sent out a survey asking that necessarily, or asking that directly to teachers, that particular trade-off. But that is feedback for us to consider. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Hi, I'm Liz Reardon, and I have a kindergartner.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. So first off, I do want to thank all the teachers. They're amazing. But I do all remote. So I will say I am dumbfounded by how good my daughter is on Zoom, doing it 4 days a week versus just the one on Wednesday. So speaking from that perspective, like the classroom, if you're going to join a Zoom, Mr. McGowan, it would be, I recommend an 8:30 Zoom for one of the Mrs. Tisa is amazing at getting them in control. So I see that, but I one of my concerns is like, how far behind is my daughter going to be, living in, I guess it's just the world we live in. I chose all remote, but that would be my worry. I think Mrs. Tisa, she feels so engaged. It's just such a hard thing to gauge in terms of kindergartners and getting 2 half an hours of learning a day. That and I know that my daughter will be fine long term, but like, is there something more as parents we should be doing?
That's a great question, Liz. So I'll give you a broader answer and then ask Mr. Tappan, Ms. Jeffries, and perhaps our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, Dr. Baker, to weigh in too. I would say overall, your daughter's going to be fine. I don't know your daughter, but your daughter's going to be fine. And I know that that's like little consolation at this point, and people are worried about that. But our experience has been, that thinking about the path of their educational journey, one, they're in the same boat that kids are in everywhere, right? So this isn't just isolated to their classroom, this district, this region. This is everywhere. So comparatively speaking, there isn't anybody that's really in a different situation. And then in terms of development and cognitively speaking, we know that kids will make the progress that they're going to make, and that it'll happen at a different pace, and they'll acquire a different skill set perhaps than they would have before. For example, your comments about how facile she is on Zoom and how well that's going. She's developing a whole different set of skills and a whole different way of approaching things than she would have if she was in school 2 years ago. I don't know better or worse. I know that we'd rather have kids with us every day and we'd rather the way it was, but I do know that they are learning differently and thinking differently. And there may be a benefit to that too that we're not realizing yet. I will say, though, over time in their experience, they're going to do well, and that we're really well aware of having to meet them where they're at, wherever that is, and still get them to the same place. It's just going to be a different pace, a different path, and a different way of approaching that. But I think we're really confident that they're still going to land in a great place. They're not going to be very far behind. They're not going to be, they're I know you're not asking this, and I'm being extreme, but their college admission is not going to be affected by this, right? Like it will be all right, and they're going to be in a good spot. And we see that, by the way, our experience over time when kids in our past have had long-term absences or long-term illnesses and had to have a different way of approaching their education, or they've gone away for a period of time because their family circumstance and they had a different type of educational approach. Perhaps it's in a foreign country for a long time where it was a different experience, or they've homeschooled and then come back and had a different experience. We have those experiences to build on, knowing that we can meet them where they're at and get them to the same place, and that they do really well over a long period of time. Anybody else that I had mentioned want to weigh in on that?
I would just say, Dr. McGowan, to add to that, Liz, thinking about Maggie's experience as a kindergartner, we would still approach her instruction and how we are paying attention to her growth and progress the same way as if we were in a regular school year. So if she were considerably behind or off the mark in any way that would maybe cause some concern, or that there maybe would be some areas that we could see you lending a hand at home or approaching her instruction differently at school, we have both an RTI committee within the building that really keeps a close eye on that data and information. And then actually, just after the February break, we meet building-wide 3 times a year to analyze whole classrooms at a time and look at the growth and progress in that way too. So just to give everybody just a little bit of reassurance, whatever we're noticing, we're taking into account the difference in face-to-face time or the different schooling approach that kids have this year, and really weighing that with the growth and progress that we'd expect. So you would be in the loop.
Matt or Debbie?
She stole my thunder. I was going to say, we're regularly assessing. I think the remote world has posed its challenges to what that looks like, especially at kindergarten. Some of the things we've typically done didn't work, and we had to kind of step back and figure out what that looks like. But I think that, the remote teachers in particular have taken a deep interest in kind of trying to get to know and at least understanding as much as we can. And I think it's going to be on all of us as we move forward and get back to normal, whatever that looks like, and evening that out, meeting kids, where their skills are and moving them forward. I think it's one of the great strengths of our staff and our kids, of our staff and our school in general, that we do that no matter what, COVID or not. We have kindergartners come in who know all their letters and all their words, or can read their sight words, and we challenge them. And then we have kids who don't know a single letter or the difference between letters and numbers, and they learn it too. So I think that it's uncharted territory. I think that's what makes everyone uncomfortable, but I feel really confident that in the adjustments we've made, that we'll be able to do that as we move forward, especially, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know how bright it is yet, but that gives me hope for moving that. So thank you so much.
And I think the only thing that I would add to kind of, complement everything that Matt and Marin have just said is we continue to, and also have plans for the summer, professionally developing our staff to increase their abilities to differentiate. So as Matt alluded to, our teachers are really good at, you have a variance in your class of kids and what their abilities are, and meeting each individual child where they are. And we will continue this summer with plans to continue that work to say, okay, this variance may be a little bit bigger, and how do we bridge those gaps for all the kids and meet each individual kid's needs? So again, really thinking about it, it is absolutely something that we are attending to at this point in time. What will fall look like? Physically, we don't know where we're going to be, but we do know that we're going to have differences with children.
Kevin, if I could add a quick comment. For those of you that don't know me, Mark Kokanovich, board president. Thank you for joining this evening. I guess the one thing I wanted to weigh in on, I've lived in Brighton 28 years. I have a 33-year-old and a 31-year-old who went through a Brighton system. My younger daughter spent her Council Rock years literally 50% of the time in the nurse's office hanging out, and is a successful adult in Washington, D.C. But my point to this is, in conversations with parents over the years, no matter what grade, I would really encourage you, and I wish someone would have had this talk with me when I was a parent of a kindergartner. Look at the long haul. Look at what you want from your child out of a K-12 education. And right now it's so hard. I understand that. I have empathy. I can't imagine parenting a kindergartner right now in addition to other children in your household. But it will work out. It will be in the long haul fine for your child. And, grade years go up, they go down, their interest level is this, it's that, they're strong in one subject and they lag in another, and then all of a sudden the next year things change. All of your kindergartners are learning a lot of lessons right now. They might not all be in curriculum. They might not all be exactly as normal, but they're learning resiliency. They're learning the use of technology. They're using ways to cope that we don't even know yet, right? In the long haul, I can assure you that we have professional folks who will assess each and every child, as Maureen said, no differently than they would if we were in regular school, and it's going to be okay. And if I could offer that, I hope that you can take some stock in the fact that our folks know what they're doing, and in the long run, you're going to be great.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Katie. No, that's right. I was going to ask for more questions. Go ahead.
Kind of going along with all of this, I understand about all the educational parts, but I have a daughter who's in all remote right now, kindergarten, and the transition to go into school. I know we don't know what fall will look like, but I think about how about half of her school will have already been familiar with the school. Going to school hybrid, and she'll be only remote. So I don't know if you guys have considered more transition things for the remote kids, just because it'll be her first time. I mean, it's like kindergarten kind of all over again, so.
For sure. So Mr. Tappan, we've talked about a couple of those things. You want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't have anything specific or exact for you, but I think that is definitely on our radar, Katie, that, the kids across the board who've been in the remote situations, we're going to need to make sure we envelop them and bring them back, particularly our kindergartners who have never set foot in the building. You as parents, I mean, I think the hardest part for me is thinking of you guys in particular, and our first graders who normally would transition in, who maybe went to a private school before. It breaks my heart to not have you all be physically in the building. So one of the ideas that we came up with, it was also suggested in the thought exchange, is we're going to be putting together a video of a tour of the building, because that's what we can do now. I can definitely put a tour so that you can see, and it's great because the building has actually changed significantly since the first day of school. So the most updated revision, and there will still be some more revisions to happen before your children come back physically, those of you who are remote. But we've got exciting things, and certainly that. And then depending on what's allowed, I am hopeful to be able to have people into the building this summer to be able to orient to, differently than we would on a regular summer or on a regular transition in, to really offer some more of those opportunities to walk around, to take tours, to give guided tours, to show parents, to show kids, because you're right, there, beyond some other differences, there is a whole group of kids who didn't set foot in the building. And I'll tell you, the ones who have are still going to be quite confused because it's such a different place. Exciting, but they're going to be like, wait a minute, the main office used to be there, and there's a library where there was an auditorium, and so a lot of things have shifted, and it's exciting, but we recognize that it's going to be a lot to take in, and hopefully, with the guidance maybe changing or restrictions getting a little bit lessened, we'll be able to plan some really meaningful return to the building. And then I think also just the social emotional support that comes those things that we're thinking about transitioning kids who have been all remote or at home a whole lot more than 5 days a week. I know it's all our goal to get them back. There are some little ones who probably really enjoy the time at home with you, and coming back is going to be a challenge. And really thinking about amping up our social emotional supports, our supports within our mental health team to just provide those those hurdles or those helpers to be able to get kids over the hurdles. Separation anxiety, things that are we're sure are going to come up. They come up in a regular year, but we are ready and getting ourselves ready for the fact they may come up even more so with the return. So
thanks, Matt. We're just about to the time where everybody else will be joining too, in terms of grades 1 and 2. Any other specific kindergarten pieces we can get at?
I would just like to share. I have a kindergartner who's also full remote, so I appreciate this video and kind of just that acknowledgement that there might be some differences, even thinking about next year already for them. So I'm grateful for that. And I also just want to say that I am so impressed with our teachers. I really am. I cannot give them enough credit because they have really done a great job. So I agree with Susan, my Wednesdays, even though I'm remote, my Wednesdays kind of are off too. So I feel you. It's different. I know it's totally different. Because my daughter, on her other days, she's on Zoom. She knows how to mute herself. She knows how to navigate Seesaw independently. She's on a roll. So it's different, what she's doing better in that sense. And then, I always have that guilt of her not being there, because I would love for her to be there too. But I mean, overall, I think that, the teachers have really done a great job at supporting the kids, and they feel, they're important. And I think feel like they're part of the Council Rock community. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Tiffany. Really appreciate that. Any other kindergarten specific items?
I just appreciate the time just for kindergarten parents, Dr. McGowan, just because, it is sort of a special group, because we're still half day. So Mr. Tappan and Ms. Jeffries and all of you, it's just nice, to have this opportunity just to be acknowledged that it is challenging for our remote kindergartners, and, it's challenging for everybody, but it is sort of a special population. And we've also not been able to bond as parents of kindergartners yet, and so this is just, it's a great opportunity, and I'm thankful that we got this. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Really appreciate that. And thanks to kindergarten parents for chiming in and seeing things and expressing things on all different sides of it, because it's important feedback. I want to go back to Aaron. You saw it differently on Wednesdays, and I guess what I want to leave you with is that's important feedback for us to know. And although we might see it differently right now, it is good for us to hear that too. And so you're at the beginning. I don't know if you have other kids that are older, but the beginning of a journey that in a district where we're really listening to that, and that's why we're asking for that feedback. So I appreciate all of the positives and the constructive pieces that are coming back to us too. They're all very, very important. So we're going to jump into the other pieces now and just give folks in grades 1 and 2 a second to hop in. We'll go back to the exchange, look at both the all remote and the hybrid comments, and share some of those thoughts, and then ask again if people would like to unmute or put questions in the chat, and we'll take a look on Facebook Live also at any other feedback that's coming up and answer some of those questions, which I'll double check right now while people are coming in case there are kindergarten specific questions on Facebook Live that we just didn't see. So we did get a question asking if we could discuss the classroom closure in the district, which happened because of possible COVID exposure. Have there been any changes identified in the procedures that need to happen? No. I mean, what I can say, and it's sensitive in terms of not revealing any personal identifiable information. The reality is the exposure is a product of a relatively natural interaction, and not because of a mistake that was made or because of somebody not following protocol. It just was determined in this particular instance for a variety of reasons that I can't dig into, again, without revealing personally identifiable information, that to err on the side of caution and close that classroom made the most sense. But it wasn't necessarily a procedural issue or somebody that did anything wrong or something that could have been changed. Actually, everybody involved did what they were supposed to do, and it's a natural part of what is potentially could happen. And so we've been very fortunate that this is the first time we've had to close a classroom. There were particular dynamics that required it in this case, and again, to err on the side of caution. But many districts have been closing classrooms throughout the school year, and we haven't had to do that. So that's not to say that we weren't willing to take a look at that. We look very hard at, could we have done anything differently? And in this case, we really couldn't have. It's just a natural product of the classroom and the procedures that were in place and how it worked in this instance. I don't mean to be at all lacking in transparency in that, but I hope you can understand it's important to not identify individuals or particular situations as well. All right, so people have had a chance to join, first and second grade people too, and again, kindergarten folks, you're more than welcome to hang on. We'd love to have you a part of the discussion as well. We'll repeat a few things at the beginning, just in terms of sharing some of the thoughts in the exchanges. We'll do that, and then we'll go to anything that's in the chat, ask people if they'd like to unmute themselves as well and have just kind of an open conversation that way, and we'll check Facebook Live before we wrap up. I'd encourage you to take a look at the chat. If you haven't had a chance to go into the exchanges, no problem. There's the all remote exchange link there, followed by the hybrid exchange. Feel free to jump right in. That's really great feedback beyond just what we talked about tonight, which only ends up being the first bunch of comments. We go through every single one of them, and every piece of feedback is important feedback wherever it lands on the spectrum. So I'll start now just by sharing the screen and going back to thoughts in the exchange that have been shared. This is the hybrid exchange, and what I'd like to do, and again, I apologize to kindergarten parents, will have to hear this again, but just start with this overall conversation about fall, about reopening, about Wednesdays, and kind of our overall feeling about this. Much of which I think was explained in yesterday's COVID update that went out, but certainly happy to repeat that again because there's several comments in the exchange about it. The situation for us is this. You'll hear out there that the president has talked about the need for schools to reopen right away, and other voices out, nationally or locally saying the same thing. Also, the head of the CDC saying, well, teachers don't need to be vaccinated before people can return to school. And I want to make sure we're clear on the terminology. When people are talking about reopening and return to school, we are reopened and kids have returned to school. Not the way we want to be. We want nothing more than to be 5 days open. But usually in those comments, in those media reports, what they're talking about is schools where people have not darkened the doorway since last year. And that reopening for them would be coming back with mitigating strategies in place, such as social distancing and the ways in which we are unable to have more kids in the building because of the precautions we're taking. So they're really not talking about districts like ours that are considered reopened. Again, not fully, but we are reopened. The notion of not having people vaccinated before kids return is really that idea, same context and same situation of coming back to an environment the way we have with these other strategies in place, namely for us, again, social distancing, which significantly limits the number of people that can be in the building. I will tell you that it is in our mind a requirement for staff to be vaccinated before we are increasing the capacity in the buildings. We have a responsibility to all stakeholders, including the staff that works in the building from a health and safety perspective. And so being focused on that and thinking about that so that we can be the best for your children and not be spreaders in the building, frankly, either, is the safest we can do for all constituencies, including kids. So that is an issue for us, access to vaccines, and we have offered every way under the sun to be a part of a solution for that countywide, and there's really just simply a lack of vaccine at this point, although those numbers are improving pretty significantly, and we're noticing that more and more staff members are able to get appointments in a variety of places, and we're moving, I think, well in the right direction, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet in a way that it could change anything. The other issue for us is the state guidelines haven't changed. The state practice hasn't changed. The best practice hasn't changed. There's nothing that really has changed since September when we started with the strategies that we're using right now. The infection rate now has gotten lower, which is great. We're concerned about variants. We're concerned about what could increase over time and being very cautious about that. But if we really break it down and people say, well, the infection rate's really low, perhaps it's really low because of the things that we're doing. So I'm not sure why we would change those yet. Again, emphasizing with you, we would do anything if we could have kids back 5 days. It just has to be back safely 5 days. And we're so hopeful that that will be able to happen sooner rather than later. In terms of the second comment that was here about prioritizing K-5 learners, we would take a look at that if we even had an option right now of bringing more kids back, which we don't. We don't have the space to still have social distancing and do that. It's different in every district. It's different in every school. Based on the square footage, based on the number of adults available to supervise kids, when you start to spread them out into different size groups. I would guess that if you asked high school parents, they'd say, please prioritize juniors and seniors, particularly seniors. So every level would like to be prioritized because of specific concerns. So I can understand that as well. And the concerns are very valid that everybody has about prioritizing their kids. In terms of Wednesday, we've made the decision at this point. We'll continue to monitor this. And certainly accept feedback on it. Kindergarten parent gave us great feedback on that as well. The Wednesday all remote day is, in our mind, more valuable than the trade-off of having very few in-person days gained by having kids come back on a Wednesday and still needing to alternate that between cohort groups. The other result of that would be having an additional asynchronous day. So in other words, we'd get ballpark 10 in-person days, but we'd have 10 more asynchronous days. And we feel like 20 all remote days is likely more valuable than that trade-off. And so every district makes different decisions. Some of those district decisions are being made because of their feelings about their Wednesday day, which are different than our feelings about our Wednesday day. And everybody has their own set of variables that play into that decision. We're very hopeful that September will bring with it a much more traditional, normal, regular approach to this with 5 days of instruction. On a weekly, if not daily basis, we are advocating for metrics for understanding what it would take to reopen, for a revisiting of these conversations around social distancing if it can be done safely, especially once staff members are vaccinated. We also understand this dichotomy, and people have asked, well, I don't understand how you can start high-risk sports but not have kids come back to school. Same question we're asking. Same question we're asking about why not be able to have the arts if kids can be wrestling, right? So this is very much on our mind as well. The reality is public health experts are making those decisions. We are advocating, but they're out of our hands. And those are the decisions they've made. We're making clear our feelings. Again, it comes back to they have very specific reasons why they would approve those things and not having more kids in the building. And we have to continue to think about then the safest way to approach that, which is what we're doing in the district. So just to kind of give you a sense for that conversation about reopening and about those things that are on our mind. And when we get to the open portion or in the chat, I'm happy to answer any more specific to that. I'd probably pause right there and just say, Mrs. Jeffries, are there any questions in the chat specific to that I can answer? All right. No, that's a big item. That's I saw you nodding. No, that's okay. The mute did not work for your head gesture, so that worked well. Let me just scroll through some of these too. This is the hybrid feedback. In terms of advocacy, we are having those conversations, and again, it's constant. And again, this feedback, not everybody would agree with that calculation, and I appreciate that and understand where you're coming from. We have not surveyed parents. We've thought about that instructionally and made some of those internal decisions, and we'll continue to monitor that as well. I'm not sure about how to quantify any chance of 5 days in person before fall. I think I've laid out what I think the variables are around that relative to vaccination. But if you think about the timing of when people can get shots, their second shot, and then when they're considered having achieved some sufficient level of immunity, it takes us really far out into this year. That doesn't mean that I've given up on it for this year. I'm hopeful that something else could change between now and then, but that will again be up to public health experts as well. This is a comment that has come up to me about other districts are able to do this. The reality is every district's square footage is different. Their classroom sizes can be different. And the number of adults they have available, the resource they have available to supervise kids when you move them from space to space, breaking them up into smaller groups, using larger spaces, it is a different variable for every district. We all went through the same process. And I can't speak to private schools. I will say that there have been some where the state has intervened and made corrective action in some places outside of this area, some in our area regarding some of those practices. So we're very confident in how we've approached that. Not everybody looks at it the same way, and that's certainly their choice to do that. I'm not calling anybody out, just saying it's a different set of circumstances everywhere. Agree that kids need to be in school. There's a comment here about research suggesting masking, ventilation, and testing are the most effective infection control strategies, not social distancing. Whether I agree with you or not, I will tell you that's what the state continues to look at and what is being discussed in the county. And we are absolutely talking to them about those social distancing rules and are there other ways this can be looked at. But again, for us, much of that hinges on when it is safe based on staff immunity as well. Full day K is important, but it shouldn't start unless our kids are back full time at Council Rock. They've had such a difficult year. It's important that our existing kids can come back fully next year and have full access to services. They've had to deal with construction and short days. They deserve a lot. Don't disagree with you. That's important feedback also for us to think about. Can you give us an update on what % of staff are currently vaccinated? Have there been conversations with the county about bringing a vaccine clinic to the school for teachers or otherwise prioritizing teachers? Yes, and yes. I've offered everything you can imagine, whether that's staff, location, time, talked about, drive-through clinic for educators through the parking lot at the high school, basically laid out a blank canvas and said, you tell us what you need and we will help you make it happen. This is that important to us. I can't tell you exactly what percentage of staff are currently vaccinated. A couple different reasons. One, I don't have an accurate number of that at this point. Two, you're talking about a personal medical decision and people are not required to be vaccinated. No different than healthcare workers. And with a vaccine that is under an emergency use authorization as opposed to full approval, it can't be required. And there isn't any legislation to require it at this time. So it really becomes an awkward situation relative to somebody making a personal health decision and us wanting to be able to say to people, hey, by the way, this is how many people are vaccinated. We're going to try and sort that out over a period of time and figure out what is appropriate and necessary and makes the most sense, because we'd like to, if the vast majority of people are vaccinated, be able to come out and tell you that and say that this is what the number is. But we'd like to ask for some patience in us sorting that out, given the fact that it's a very personal decision for many people. And although we would like to see everybody vaccinated, we have to respect their desire to medically either not divulge that or not get vaccinated if they choose not to. And that is a decision people can make. I'd like to go to, I'll ask Mr. Tappan to comment on one thing here while I flip over to the remote feedback. Can special classes be available every day, even if that means it's an at-home Zoom class with the sick day cycle, in-person specials aren't consistent, et cetera? Mr. Tappan, could you just address specials in general, any other things that you noticed? Because we did go through these comments earlier today too. Yeah,
I would say special areas are definitely a place that the schedule that we put together, lots of things aren't ideal. The special areas and the rotations and the way our 6-day cycle works is very frustrating for them as well. However, I don't have more staff. So I think that's the challenge in terms of being able to offer kind of that while they're teaching in person, teaching at home as well. So we'll continue to think about that. Our special areas are eager. They're sad to be missing out on kids and getting them half the time if they're hybrid. And so I think we'll continue to be thoughtful about how we can provide, that instruction and that enrichment that shouldn't be enrichment. It should be what all kids get. So I think we'll keep working at that. It definitely is a frustration for our staff as well on our end. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So if we take a look now at the all remote exchange and go through some of those comments as well, many similar comments. Let's see here. We are definitely making plans as soon as we possibly can. We'd love to have people back. Activities. We talked about this a little bit with kindergarten parents. Mr. Tappan, can you touch on that again relative to thinking about different things towards the end of the year?
Sure. So we're, we started engaging our staff in thinking about, again, based on what the recommendations and allowances are going to be, of what the kind of spring and into end of year will look like, and thinking about how we can be creative and, do some activities that might look different. But also then really starting to think about, hopefully, as many people have kind of alluded to, the return to school and what does that look like, and thinking about what do we need to plan for, what can we plan for to get those who have been, especially our remote children who maybe have not set foot in the building. And we talked about this with kindergarten, but I recognize that I have a huge cohort of first grade parents who are brand new to Brighton, have moved in, or were at a private school last year for kindergarten and were excited to come to Council Rock as first graders. So thinking about how can we plan some things to get people acclimated to the building? One of the things that we'll do, we already had on our planning, but Mrs. Jeffries and I, along with our district videographer, will be putting together a new tour, a video tour. I did one at the beginning of the year, but you'll be shocked at how different the building looks. So it's time. The project is not complete, but many things have changed. So even those of you who have been in the building, but have taken maybe a year away, you're going to be shocked at some of the changes that have taken place. So we'll be working on that over the next few weeks to be able to release to everyone. And I know that some of our classroom teachers, our remote classroom teachers, have also, with parent permission, have started doing in-person assessment. And I have to tell you, the first graders, it was primarily first grade teachers I saw doing this. The squeals of joy that the kids had when they saw their teacher face-to-face live was really exciting. And then I walked by and I felt like a rock star. I was in person, but they really just got a sense to be able to be in the building. And we're looking at, doing those kinds of things as we get, safer, and making sure that everybody's safe, to provide those opportunities for kids, knowing that it's a challenge, and certainly, wishing that it could be different, but thinking about how we can build those transitions in, moving into next year for sure.
Thanks, Matt. There's a lot of great feedback that is constructive and very helpful. And I don't want to skim past either, because I know it's important for our educators to hear this too. Some really nice positive comments, and that helps us understand also what is working and what we should do. But we do appreciate those comments, and we pass them along also. This was a really nice one. Really appreciate all the hard work. It's amazing to think of all you go through on a daily basis. And again, we appreciate that. I think, that we're doing this because we want to keep learning how we can keep getting better, and absolutely welcome the constructive feedback. It is good to hear when things are working for people as well. Direct instruction 4 days per week has been key. Would be ready and willing to return to in-person if it didn't rely on asynchronous work. For students with an IEP in the gen ed setting, the in-person learning requires either leaving the gen ed setting or significant async load. And that's a very fair point, and we understand that. Also, certainly a challenge of the time. Another really positive comment for our teachers to hear, and we appreciate that. This is an interesting one about remote learners having opportunities with their class for face-to-face interaction outside and socially distant. That's certainly something we can think about as we move into warmer weather and can have kids outside a little bit more easily. I think there's a lot of different issues for people in terms of getting their kids there, depending on their workload during the day themselves when they're working from home, childcare issues, kids who are in different childcare situations, all different challenges that people have, and we don't want to leave people out either. But this is a good suggestion, something for us to think about. how we might be able to manage this, or at least help facilitate the conversation if people are interested in independently as parents trying to organize some of this as well. There might be opportunities for that. Mr.
I know Dr. McGowan, I think there's a thought later on about creating like a class directory.
Yep. Talk about that now. That's good.
Yeah, and it just ties into this in terms of allowing networking opportunities and, play dates that then families can make the decisions about their comfort level. I can certainly talk with, there it is. We can't release directly from us the list just because it's a release of information, but we can work with the remote teachers to create something that you voluntarily give of your contact information, and then anybody who's chosen to be on that list, we can then share that and have that published. We just can't print off a list, and I know it seems like a little thing, but it's a pretty big thing within the educational law that we can't just send that. So I can work with we can work with the remote teachers in particular to hopefully get something for your classes if they haven't done that already. So
a comment here, not a fan of IXL. Frustrating for my son when he's punished by going back on the progress bar for making a mistake on a question. That's important feedback for us to hear. I appreciate that. And certainly would like to dig into that further if you're interested in reaching out to us to talk a little bit more about that. Person having a challenge keeping paperwork organized with lots of printouts, pictures taken, submitted. Do they still need to be kept? So there are a lot of printouts and pictures taken or submitted. Do they still need to be kept? Mr. Tappan?
I would say the classroom teacher, you certainly could consult with them, but I would say if they've passed, you can maybe ask if there are certain things that can either be saved into your, special file that you have for your child if it's artwork or something. But other than that, I would say it doesn't need to be kept unless it's something that the teacher references and has said is going to be part of like their toolkit at home. So if you have specific questions about that, I might reach out to the teacher. But other than that, I wouldn't worry about keeping a lot of that back work needing to reference it.
Great, thank you. Question here, I'm a parent in the community and my younger daughter would join CRPS this coming fall. Are you planning on starting kindergarten full day? Thanks. I'm not sure if this person is tuned in, but I'd be happy to answer it. And if anybody else on the call is probably wondering about this too. We are still planning full day kindergarten. So that is in the budget at the moment. That is something we're planning on doing. But we're still sorting through what the governor's proposal in terms of state aid has told us. If you're new to that conversation, it's a key landmark for us in terms of figuring out what our budget will be. And we are asking for feedback in the district e-news starting tomorrow. We'll be sending out a link to get feedback from the community because it is a significant investment that was planned for fall of 2021. However, our plan along the way was to have positions available by this point, and so many dynamics have changed since that plan was first originated. I don't want to make you nervous, though. That is still part of the plan, and it is still a priority for us. We won't be able to make a final decision for some time yet. It will be over the next couple of months, but the direction we are still heading is in having full-day kindergarten, and we recognize the importance of the promise that we made too. This person pointed out that last summer on a call with Dr. Mendoza and myself that we mentioned younger students being a priority full-time. We shared to expect Monroe County districts to prioritize in-person instruction for younger students. Where do we stand with that as we look at it? And I talked a lot about that at the beginning. Every building is different, and it's not necessarily about prioritizing one group over the other because it's sort of an independent decision based on the dynamics of each building, the size of each building, the resources that are available. It's not as if there's a resource going somewhere else that's making it impossible for Council Rock to have kids in person full day. It's really entirely about social distancing and that issue for us. So that, that's really the bulk of the feedback. There's a couple other thoughts there. We go through every one of them and appreciate people sharing those as well. Just want to open it up now to conversation and to chat questions. Marin, any of those that we want to start with?
Sure. A couple people had a question about if there had been any thought to changing the Wednesday start times to something along the lines of 9:30 to allow for more folks to participate in the lunch program since the pickup time is during school time.
So start the day later, but the lunch start.
Or a lunch pickup to be earlier. I guess there's a conflict as far as when folks can come and pick up the lunches as to when the kids are starting Zoom, it sounds like. And correct me, Jennifer, if I'm not articulating that, or Christine, if there's something else that you're trying to get at that I'm not communicating.
So I think the best answer to that question is that I'm going to ask Lou Lima, our Assistant Superintendent for Administration, who's there, if he wants to comment tonight, but also just for him and Mr. Tappan to touch base on how to maybe think about the times and coordinate that, just to make sure we're thinking about it, whether or not we have enough flexibility. Sometimes we're limited relative to staffing and when we can do that, but I'd also say we want to think about that. I don't think there's a lot of obstacle to that.
Sure, they're clarifying that the pickup is from 9 to 11, which is concurrent with the Zoom.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so
I would offer that if that's a barrier for that individual family, we'd still have capacity to be able to deliver the meals in the morning, so they could reach out to the food service office. And we probably do have capacity to maybe bump that up for an earlier pickup time. I could certainly work with our director, but we'd love to be able to accommodate, because we're not seeing great participation in a food service program. So anything we can do to be more accommodating, we're really all ears.
Fantastic. Thank you.
There's also another question just in regard to vaccinations and kids, and some thoughts about wondering how we could come back to increase occupancy if students and teachers, if students are not vaccinated, even if teachers are.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I don't know the answer. Again, I'm fond of saying I'm not a useful doctor. I think that it will be up to public health people to make that decision. My gut reaction is that because the transmission rate is so low in young children, and that the illness generally for young children is relatively mild, that might be part of the calculation, again, by public health people, that it would be desirable for kids to be vaccinated, but that if they were still masked, distance might not be as much of an issue, that the most susceptible people in the school environment would be adults. And so I'm guessing that's what would go into their thought in saying that they could reduce distancing before everybody's vaccinated. I'm also guessing that if that happened, there would still have to be remote options offered by a district because of people's comfort level with that approach. I can't say for sure. I don't know. I've gotten almost every prediction wrong, by the way, as probably most people during the pandemic, but those are kind of some of the things that are on my mind and the way they seem to be thinking, but I don't have any tea leaves or inside information. I don't think anybody does relative to some of those decisions.
Okay. There's another question also wondering about, now that we're kind of into the year, how long are most classes on Zoom each Wednesday, and wondering if teachers might be available now to do more than an hour.
Yeah, so that's I think that's something that we've continued to try to grow capacity within classrooms, and teachers have been making kind of those educational decisions based on their class, based on the content, and balancing that. That's certainly something that we will continue to look at. Definitely, if you have a question or a concern, reaching out to your classroom teacher to talk about that, but you certainly can also reach out to Mrs. Jeffries or myself to know a little bit more about the length of Zoom and making sure that it's a productive Zoom, but also that it's providing kids with what they need. So I think that's important points.
And one more question, I think this might be more to Lou, wondering if there's a way or a possibility of opting out of the disposable plastic with the school lunch program.
We don't have that option right now, but New York State is almost mandating that an option going forward. So this is probably the last year that will be a product that's served.
Okay. Kevin, I think we're all set with the Zoom chat questions.
Great. So feel free to continue to add those if you'd like, but I would just open it up now to anybody who'd like to jump in, unmute themselves. Any questions that you might have, we'd be happy to answer them. Anybody want to go first?
I guess I'll continue from before. This is Erin Whitmer, sticking around for this part as well. You mentioned that there were some metrics that you're looking at in terms of when it would be deemed safe to go back. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of elaborate on those and what you're looking at and what the state is looking at. And kind of to the question that you already answered, like COVID is still around. It's going to be around in the fall. There's no plan to test vaccines on kids this age. So absolutely, kids will not be vaccinated at this age come the fall. So if you could just detail what are the possible scenarios under which kids would be allowed back 5 days a week, and what are the metrics that would make that possible, and also what timeline are you hoping to make that decision on, just so that as parents we can all plan for multiple scenarios and hopefully the optimal scenario. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Erin. And everybody, I feel a little bit stuck in answering this question, and I'll tell you why. Several of my colleagues have and several school boards are talking about metrics. I don't have specific metrics. I want to make sure I may have inartfully said that. What I meant was we are asking public health officials and elected officials, health department people, what would be the metrics that you would look at? So what would trigger for you a comfort level in kids returning to school? I don't know what those are. So I've had colleagues, who are advocating or discussing specific metrics relative to infection rate. I don't know what that means, right? So I'm not an epidemiologist. I know I can read it and kind of make an assessment of what I think it means, but the difference between a 1.5% in the population infection rate and 2.5%, I don't think I'm qualified to make a decision relative to greater public health. I don't think I'm trained in that way. And I think they need to tell us what those will be so we have an understanding. However, I'll also say to you that even if they tell us that, it's not a metric I can shoot for. So I can't do anything myself to impact that number. So in other words, we set goals and we talk often about graduation rate or around the results of particular testing we do with kids to push on particular aspects of the curriculum or develop additional programs to get more kids across the stage, right? Those things are somewhat within our control and a metric that we can live by. Infection rate being a goal, I can't do anything about that other than continue to remind people to mask and keep a distance, et cetera. And we should be vigilant no matter what, whether the infection rate is 9% or 2%, we should be pushing hard on keeping people safe and doing all of those things. So I don't know specifically what that will be. And I'll also tell you the state has had a pretty significant habit of having metrics that they blow right past and not really address. So orange zone metrics, hospitalization rates, the algorithm was changed multiple times. And I don't really know what it meant. I just know that people had to tell me, here's what you have to do as a school district. It was helpful at some point to know what a metric was that we had to keep an eye on so we'd be prepared for either closure or a testing program, et cetera. But then they didn't utilize those metrics and it didn't seem to matter as much. So I'm hopeful that they'll start to define that. So at least there's predictability and at least we can begin planning. For example, if they were to tell us, well, if a community infection rate is X for this amount of time, then schools will be all open. Well, then we would know, okay, we're 5 weeks into the 8-week period that it needs to be at a certain level. We're moving towards reopening. I mean, I think that's what we're getting at is give us some kind of goalposts so that we know what the metric would be that you're going to evaluate so that we have some kind of predictability. I don't disagree with you about the vaccination issue. I think that, again, if I had to predict the crystal ball, which I've been wrong most times, is that because you would have the people most likely to be infected and spreading in school at that point in time vaccinated, in other words, the adults, that you would then likely be able to say, okay, if it seems to be that the infection rate is very low and the people most likely to get sick are immune, then we could reduce distancing at least and have masking until kids are not spreading it to each other through lack of social distance, but have masking in place. And then that's when kids could return. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. Either way, I also couldn't give you a timeline because we're not being given a timeline. So last year, it was on a 2 week, every 2 week, every 2 week, every 2 week beginning in March whether or not we would stay closed or reopen or have other models. And then even as we approached April, May, it was, well, we're going to give you guidance in June for how to reopen, which we didn't get until late July, mid to late July. So I don't know the timing of that. I really wish I could give you a better answer, but it's a conversation we're having constantly with policymakers and expressing everything I'm saying to you. There's nothing I'm not saying to you that I don't say to them, and I probably say it to them in stronger terms, to be candid with you. I see a question from Jennifer about plans for rapid, the school rapid COVID testing program will continue, possibly expanding it. So we've expressed to the health department that we would like to continue testing. We requested tests, and we are right now not being responded to. And I think I'm told that that's a product of them not knowing yet whether or not they can devote a testing supply to schools, because they were just told that they would now be responsible for perhaps providing tests for weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, other large gatherings. And so they're holding on to their test supply while they sort out what their requirements will be and what that means for them. But we have made it very clear that we would like to continue a testing program despite not being required, and we're waiting on getting tests to be able to do that. Other questions, anything else in the chat, or anything else that somebody would like to unmute and talk about? Aaron, did I get at what you were asking with at least as much information as I possibly can?
Yes, you did. And I appreciate the position you're in and everyone is in. But hopefully you can see from our perspective, I mean, 2 days a week in person is just not working for us. So we'd like to kind of, I'd hate to say that we'd have to think of another option if it's not going to be full-time return in the fall. But unfortunately, just given my kids' needs, we're going to need to plan for that scenario. So the sooner we have more information, obviously we'd love nothing more than to keep the kids where they are. But 2 days a week is just not working for my kiddos specifically. And I know every family is different, but it's just not for us.
I totally understand where you're coming from, and would not want to see you have to take advantage of another option, but would understand why you would. And as soon as we have information, we will pass it along. Other questions? Anything else that I can answer for people, or we can discuss, or for anybody on the screen?
What's the current status of the iPad rollout?
Mr. Tappan, Dr. Baker, Mrs. Jeffries?
Yeah, I know. I actually just got an update. They started at French Road. So 3rd, 4th, and 5th, they're wrapping up with 5th. And then we will begin the deployment after February break of iPads to 2nd, then 1st, then kindergarten. And that's the plan. I'm anxious to talk to Dr. Rio and to the folks at French Road to find out what worked and capitalize on that. I know there's some logistical things in terms of getting iPads back and undoing logins and re-logging in that will possibly be more complicated for our little ones. So just interested in that, but it's definitely coming and around the corner after February break. Dr. Baker, if I'm wrong, tell me.
No, you're fine. The only thing I would add is if you are in a situation where your child needs an individual device, then please contact, there's a form you need to fill out. I'll go find it and I'll throw it into the chat. On case by case basis, we can certainly deploy an individual device at this point in time. But if you're not, then, the rollout will be as Mr. Tappan described.
There's a question in the chat. Should there be a hybrid program for next school year? Is it possible to consider Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday cohorts to give somewhat of a rhythm to the week? And Leora, first, I would hope that there is not a hybrid program. However, if there is, that's feedback that we would look to gather from the community and certainly consider that going forward. The reason why we didn't do that this year was the idea that if you were a student who went Monday, Tuesday, and then you had your Zoom on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is a long time to go before you're back with your teacher in your class again. Likewise, a student Thursday, Friday, it's a long period of time before you have in person, before you're back in, and we lose more touch that way. However, that's, it's in some cases we're sacrificing one issue for the other, and I understand where you're coming from in terms of a rhythm for the week. We're often in our house looking at each other saying which day is it and who's doing what tomorrow and what is it again, because it just is every single day seems to be an adventure and a different kind of one for sure. Any other questions that I can answer also? Just taking a look at anything else we don't see anything else on Facebook Live.
Dr. McGowan, I just want to take the opportunity, I say it a lot. I say it in my, in my e-news, but we are so appreciative of the support and the love that the parents and families have given to our teachers. We are doing everything we possibly can. We're really thankful for those of you who participated tonight in sharing your thoughts. We're trying to get better. We're trying to, do everything we can in these, unusual and not ideal circumstances, but we couldn't be more thankful for the support that you give to us, and we really just want to thank you and look forward to the future. That's what I just keep thinking about, so thanks.
Well said. Thank you for saying that. Absolutely agree. All right, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I hate to say last call, but I'm more than happy to answer anything. Don't feel like you're holding people up from leaving their grad class at 10 o'clock at night. You're welcome to jump in. As always, please call, I'd say stop by, but we're not doing that right now, but we would love to hear from you and connect with you in any way, shape, or form, and answer questions that you have and be there for you. We'll get there, as Dr. Mendoza said often. We're in the home stretch. It's a long home stretch, but we are. And we're getting there. So thanks for everything you're doing to keep people healthy and safe and support the work that's happening in the district. Take care, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
This has been a special presentation from Council Rock Primary School.